Due to economic reforms and liberalization in the early 90s, China has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world. As the capital of China, Beijing has become a vibrant city. Urban infrastructure has not been able to keep up with this growth and trash is piling up. The increasing solid waste in Beijing is a serious problem and needs to be a governmental priority because the environment's restorative capacity is limited. If action is not taken soon, environmental damages and health consequences may become irreversible. Beijing has seen a tremendous increase in urbanization in the past 20 years, with the population having increased to levels that the city is struggling to accommodate. The population has doubled since the 1980s from 9 million to about 20 million. Beijing is one of the few municipalities in China that has a per capita GDP at levels of a developed economy. Despite this, there is also a large poor population that consists of over 1 million citizens. The city originally consisted of a small urban center surrounded by a ring of suburban housing. In an effort to plan for future growth, a second ring was added around the city and farmland was converted into housing. In the 1980s, Beijing was already surrounded by 5,000 hills of garbage. Garbage was being placed in these 5,000 dumps without any regulation or governmental supervision. In 1983, the Chinese government finally felt that the health and safety problems caused by the trash had grown to uninhabitable levels and invested $338 million to build over 20 landfills and waste treatment facilities. Though the government's response has led to some reduction of waste, it was not an adequate solution, and waste production has continued to grow out of control.
During 2008 and 2010, a young photographer Wang Jiuliang traveled around Beijing and took photos of over 400 garbage dumps. These dumps formed a belt of garbage ring between the 5th and 6th ring roads in Beijing and were called the 7th garbage ring. Wang's photos demonstrated how serious the trash problem was in Beijing. Currently, 90% of the garbage is disposed of through sanitary landfills, 8% by composting, while 2% through incineration. And nowadays, Beijing has 6 refuse transfer stations, 13 sanitary landfills, and 3 comprehensive disposal factories, which means that almost all of the photographed garbage dumps were illegal. The illegal dumps, which are not under Beijing's sanitary monitoring system, require nothing, making their cost of operation much lower, and contractors can make money out of recycling the waste. However, even the traditional sanitary landfills method is problematic for the solid waste issue in Beijing. Due to economic growth and urbanization, every day the city's 17 million people generate some 18,000 tons of waste, and it increased about 8% each year. Population growth and the increasing per capita consumption create a reinforcing loop, contributing more garbage to the stock contained in the landfills. While the government is attempting to create balancing loops through waste processing facilities, the reinforcing loop is stronger at the current rates. Due to the large amount of durable materials such as plastics, natural decomposition provides only a very weak balancing loop that barely affects the stock. The growing amount of waste will soon exceed the current waste disposal capacity. Therefore, long-term and sustainable solutions to solid waste must be considered and implemented by the Chinese government before the delays in the system become insurmountable and impossibility to regain environmental equilibrium.
The greatest environmental hazard for Beijing as a whole is contamination of groundwater. A 2010 study by the Ministry of Land and Resources predicted that Beijing's underground water level will soon rise enough to permeate 76 garbage disposal sites, thereby polluting drinking water. In addition to environmental damage, the lack of infrastructure to dispose of trash has health consequences for Beijing's residents. The effects are greatly amplified in the poor population who live close to Beijing's landfills. Official sanitary landfills must follow strict construction and operation requirements, including measures to prevent seepage of toxic chemicals into the groundwater, trap toxic gases, and restrict the spread of odors. The plethora of unofficial landfills surrounding Beijing has no such regulation, and when these safeguards are absent, local residents are at risk for a host of medical conditions. Residents are most at risk from direct contact with surface water and soil and inhalation of chemicals. The direct effect of proximity to landfills, however, is difficult to measure. Multiple studies have been done of the health of residents close to landfills, And while these studies have shown higher rates of disease, it is difficult to control for confounding variables within the population, such as socioeconomic status. Additionally, harmful effects are usually generated by low doses of a mix of chemicals over a long period of time. Studies have found medical conditions linked to landfills include low birth rate and shorter than average children, while adults have a higher risk of leukemia, lung, and stomach cancer. While conditions are harmful for residents who do not have direct contact with the waste, they are much worse for the 100,000 people who earn their livelihood by sorting trash by hand into recyclable components. The majority of the profits of the illegal dumps come from selling this recyclable material. The sorters are at risk of cuts from the contaminated material and work in an unsanitary environment with insects thriving in the trash. In addition, the workers are constantly inhaling the dust and toxic chemical vapors produced by the trash.
The Chinese government has taken some steps to address the trash problem. As a short-term solution, the government is building larger numbers of incinerators to burn up the trash. These incinerators, however, present problems of their own. In addition to the energy required to run them, the smoke will add to the air pollution around the city. The end result may be the conversion of physical trash to air pollution, negating improvements in the quality of life for local residents. Given the scale of the trash problem, there is no way to tell how many incinerators are necessary to solve the problem. Beijing's trash problem is one illustration of concerns over China's ability to cope with its overall environmental problems. The Chinese government lacks the bureaucratic organization and manpower necessary to solve issues like those in Beijing. Compared to the United States, China's lead environmental agency, the Ministry of Environmental Protection, is almost 90 times smaller. More importantly, the environmental agency lacks influence within the larger Communist Party apparatus to create and enforce dramatic change. Efforts undertaken by the National Party to curb pollution and other environmental hazards are often ignored by provincial party officials, who enjoy substantial autonomy and can be influenced by industrial interests. The worsening of waste and pollution problems, like those in Beijing, are increasing domestic pressure to find solutions. There have been periodic protests against the opening of new factories across China. Social media sites like Weibo allow these protesters to connect, organize, and communicate with a larger audience. A driver of these protests is a rising middle and professional class that wants a higher standard of living. Unfortunately, the government has responded by cracking down against some of the harsher environmental critics. This response does not assuage international concerns over whether the Chinese political model is stable enough to hold as domestic incomes continue to rise. As long as the consequences of trash accumulation remain limited to society's periphery, the population will have no incentive to reduce their consumption and garbage production. This tragedy of the commons can only be solved by establishing a clear link between consumers and the effects of their actions. This could be done by including the costs of the externality in a sales tax on disposable products. A more effective solution would be to educate the population in order to shift attitudes towards conservation and recycling. This paradigm shift would lead to a societal movement to produce less waste and promote sustainability. With new social accountability, the system has a potential to regain equilibrium.
晚安，北京，我留下许多情。不管你爱与不爱，都是历史的尘埃。晚安，北京，我留下许多情。不敢在午夜问路，怕走到了百花深处。人说吧。